Today on Ministry Monday, I am speaking with Alan Hommerding. Hi, Alan. How are you today?
Hello, Amanda. I'm fine. Thank you so much for the invitation to join you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your time and your expertise in advance on the power of words. So that was the topic that I've had on my mind for a while, and your name just kept coming back to talk about with me. So thank you for being willing to talk about this with me.
Great, great. Love it.
So let's start, of course, the reason that your name came to mind is that one of your many charisms is that you excel in hymn texts. Is that okay to say? Is that a safe assumption?
Well, I'm personally not comfortable with Excel, but that's more my baggage than it is an inaccuracy on your part. Okay. I believe. So yeah, let's go with that.
Okay, okay. Yeah. So I mean you one of the things that I have always admired about your work is that you have a depth of knowledge and a depth of hymn text that you have written to adapt to hymns themselves. And so I want to talk a little bit about the power of that relationship today that I believe makes for a nuanced and complex but powerful hymnody in our faith and in our singing relationship as a church. So I'd like to start with just a simple question, but it's not simple, but I think it's a great place to start is what do you believe is the relationship between melody and text?
Well, I'd like to think of a quote from the French composer Francis Poulenc, who said, music and words must be in a happy union, not a marriage of convenience. So I guess my aspiration is always to be seeking that happy union, not merely uh, we have the right number of syllables and we have the right number of note heads. Let's go. The other relationship I have found, and I will say this has really come much more into focus for me the past couple of years. I read a book called Hermeneutics of Hymnody, and I don't think it's going to be made into a movie, so you probably will need to read it if you're really interested. But Scotty Gray, the author, spends a whole chapter on the sound of words. So words have their own sonics before they are ever set to music. Now, I always said that I prefer when other composers, I do write music, but when it comes to my hymn texts, I prefer other composers to write tunes for them because I enjoy hearing what music somebody else finds in them. But I've become increasingly convinced that as an author, it's my duty to be aware of the sonics of the words I have written, and that those words have their own music before they are paired with music or before somebody writes music for them, or in the very, very rare instance where, I mean, I've had a couple composers send me a tune and say, I thought I could write a text for this, but I haven't been able to. Do you want to take a try? And, I've done that a couple times, but, usually I really try to listen for the music that's in the words prior to their relationship with actual music notation. And so if the sonics of the words are strong, and then it's paired with a strong hymn tune or somebody crafts a strong new melody, then we have strength on strength to go there. And that to me is really the ultimate goal uh, that we're looking for when we pair up words and music.
What constitutes that strength in the word and that sonic strength that you're going after?
And well, I'll just let you know that right now I'm flashing back to the first day of first semester preaching when I was in seminary. And the professor said, there are 3 rules for good preaching. We all started writing in our notebooks. In the olden days, that's what we did. We all wrote in our notebooks three rules for good preaching. And then she said, unfortunately, nobody knows what they are. So the question you asked is landing us right in the middle of that usually elusive area between the craft and the art. So what constitutes good sonics? I will always say that the ear is the final judge of that. And so when I work with new authors or even veteran authors, I'll say, I just tell them to make sure that the words get out in the air, because that's where they're going to live eventually. So even if you just sing your new text on a single note, you'll find things that might trip up somebody in the assembly. So is it, this just came up in a text I'm working on about Saint Benedict. And it was like, should it be each saint or all saints? So to go from that double L of all to the S of saints is a little less clumsy in the mouth than each saint. Of course, it can be done, and not anybody who's singing that hymn on a Sunday will be thinking about it at that granular level. But I think that's my job, my responsibility, to really make sure that these words don't have their final home on the page. They have their final home in the air. So whenever I'm working on a text, and this is what I tell people writing tunes for my words, or people trying to work on their own texts, is like, your words have to get out in the air. You cannot have a good or accurate perception of them until they are out there.
And when someone writing these texts does that and spends that intentional time with the text, what do you believe is the impact when sung congregationally?
Well, nothing else, just the ease of not having to have clusters of consonants falling over one another. That helps. But then there are, on the flip side, if you do something intentional, like alliteration. I recently have been reading Bill Moyer's book, Fooling Around with Words. He interviews 6 different poets, and one poet uses the word echoic, echo with an IC at the end. And a more technical term for that might be assonance, words that have some sonic relationship. In one of my texts, I put the word mission and future in that kind of pairing. But the base sounds of those 2 words kind of echo each other. So it's not only rhyme, it's not only the regular pattern of meter that people latch onto. Our brains are wired to seek out patterns and to respond to and to recognize patterns. This, I think, is one of the great gifts of hymnody. People will sometimes say, well, yes, especially for children. I'm like, no, for everybody. And especially in the world we live in, we have such a barrage of words coming at us all the time. So when you encounter words in a hymn that echo each other or rhyme with each other or are in patterns with each other, that is something you're not conscious of it or aware of it. but that is something your brain responds to. And it's the thing that helps us retain. This is why we teach kids the ABCs with a rhyming folk melody, twinkle, twinkle, Uh, it's the way we're wired. So being conscious of this sort of thing when you're crafting a text, again, that uh, there will be people who dismiss this, because it's all about the spirit and the feeling, and all of that. And I was like, we were made in the image of God. God did this. So why not celebrate that gift and be aware of it and respond to it and work so that people can utilize it the way it was intended.
Do you, when crafting your text, do you ever first look at a hymn tune that you wanted to use, or do you look at the text first?
It's a two-part answer. Um, the first part of the answer is yes, I used to. And now the answer is only if it's a part of a commission that people say, well, we want to sing this to Amazing Grace or whatever the tune might be. Then, yeah, I definitely spend time with the tune by itself. And again, I won't put the sonics of any words with it. I will just, ooh, ooh. I might play it on my flute. I might line it out on the keyboard in a very high register and a very low register to sort of explore it and get to know it a little bit better. Um, so yeah, I do take that into consideration if I am writing a text for an existing tune. Part 2A of the second part of my answer is is that I totally get the practicality of writing new text to fit a tune that people already know, that already have in their hearts. And, especially when people have written text to respond to a crisis or some sort of disaster, I completely get then that when people are seeking comfort or they're trying to express lament, they don't want to be working to learn a new melody, that it's much easier to just sing the new words with what's already in their hearts. I get that. But I think there's a danger that we are, as I like to put it, we are launching an increasing number of hymn texts into a vanishing pool of hymn tunes, or I guess evaporating pool would be a more correct analogy. And also, I have some composer friends who say they've just given up writing new hymn tunes because everybody wants to sing Nettleton or Beach Spring yet again, and I don't blame them. So I do on occasion get a little, I don't know, smart alecky, and I will, if I've not been given a specific instruction that this should fit to Amazing Grace or whatever, I will write in what older hymnals call peculiar meter, uh, one of a kind or irregular, so that it has to go to a composer. And to me, that's also a little bit the work of allowing a little bit more of the spirit into the world. Whenever we empower a composer to craft a new melody for people to sing, we've helped a little bit more of the Holy Spirit come into the world as well. Do not quench the spirit, St. Paul says.
Speaking of not quenching the spirit, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is a bit of a practical application for a hymn text, whether it's yours or anyone else's. If someone is listening to this and they are a cantor in particular, or I would even say a pianist or organist, how can we as music ministers add subtle artistry to the text using maybe commas or phrasing to lengthen or move through a phrase when maybe by instinct we may want to breathe, but maybe we want
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
honor the punctuation that is there? How can we
Yeah.
do that?
Well, that's to me, that's always a balancing act, especially if you're dealing with a strophic hymn that's being sung by a whole congregation. Um, Part of your job is to lead, part of your job is to support. And anybody who knows the art of being a cantor knows how tricky that balance can be. I think that's an instance where, in the case of strophic hymnody, you can lead by example. And when you prepare something on your own time, to really pay attention to the commas, to the punctuation. Some places, especially texts that are with folk melodies, don't always, and again, particularly the interior verses, sometimes will be the place where the not quite 100% comfortable alignment is. So, to spend some time with that and look for the word stresses and not always put the word stress on the where the melody is. That's in hymnody, that's a leading by example thing. And I also think that if you're doing responsorial psalmody, or verses for a communion processional song, if you're doing it with that kind of care, again, you are leading by example. And and again, nobody goes to brunch after Sunday Mass saying, we really need to be more careful about matching our breathing and the punctuation and the placement of the accent within the melodic line, the way the cantor does. I mean, nobody goes to brunch saying that. They say, I'm going to have extra bacon. Or okay, that's what I say at brunch. Um, but I think that's a much more subtle leading by example thing. That this is when you are singing God's praise with care. This is
Hmm.
how you do it.
When it comes to hymn texts, and I'll just say lately, what inspires you as you write hymn texts?
I just have to. I'll start with my confession that my kind of jokey answer to that is, don't discount the possibility that a commission and a stipend can't be inspiring. Um, so, now that we have that out of the way, um, inspiration comes from many, many places. My most frequent place of inspiration uh, comes from when I learn of or perceive or see a catechetical need. I said this about myself, written this about myself a number of times. As a hymn writer or a text writer, I'm mostly a catechist with a rhyming dictionary.
Hmm.
There are other people who are far more poetic. There are other people who rhyme way better than I do. It's not my gift, which is why I know all the best websites for rhyming. But other people are just really, really terrific in being that essential voice of prophetic witness and calling us to mercy and justice. There are people who really have those gifts, and I try to include all those things as much as I can in my own work. But a hymn like "From Ashes to the Living Font," the Lenten hymn, is, I think, a good example of where I enter in a spirit of inspiration. So that hymn, which was a commission, by the way, but uh, but and it was an RCIA director who commissioned it, who wanted something to teach about the season of Lent, that Lent is primarily baptismal, the way the general norms of the liturgical year and calendar say that it is. A hymn that would express that, that would connect to the Gospels of the season, that would lead to the empty tomb and the resurrection, and ultimately have its destiny on Pentecost. That was laid out as the catechetical task of that hymn. And that is the sort of thing that I respond to very, very well. I have a few times actually been inspired by preaching. There are a few texts that have come into the world that way. But I would say for me, aside from somebody, the Diocese of Oklahoma City asked for a hymn text for Stanley Rother, who's going to be a newly canonized saint. He was a martyr in Central America, I believe. So reading about his life, of course, and his witness and his martyrdom was very, very inspiring. So something like that. Working on a hymn text about Saint Benedict right now, and so of course reading the sources about him, I did not know the saying the sacred cross is my light. I never knew that phrase in connection with Benedict. So in addition to that occurring within that new hymn text, there may be a whole separate, the cross is my light, the cross is our light. There may be another whole text on that subject coming down the road. Yeah, Bene Creator Spiritus, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. A practical application question again. If someone is listening who is planning music for the upcoming Lent and Easter seasons, and they want to be more intentional with the tunes, and especially the text that they pick, what should we look for in terms of text?
Well, again, as I said already, Lent is primarily a baptismal season, secondarily penitential. It's it's a both and, but the texts that have anything to do with our baptismal call, that vocation, of course not ones that have an alleluia in them, but to look for those things. And we are in year A. We are, yes. Yeah, we are. I'm sorry, when you're a liturgical products editor, you're sometimes living
In
in
a
one
different
year
liturgical year.
and working in a different liturgical year, and sometimes in two different liturgical years at once. So we are in year A. So you have those beautiful John Gospels coming up. So really, really start looking for the water and the thirst and the light and the vision and the life and the lower S spirit that instills life in everything. It's also, I believe, I work in both the Revised Common Lectionary and the Roman Catholic, but I believe A is also, it's the year, the Genesis year in the Roman Catholic lectionary as well. So you start out with that, that story in Eden. And so I always suggest, because it's there that God creates us, he creates Adam, the man, by breathing into a lump of clay. The thing that gives us the divine life is breath. So start, just very broadly looking for the breathing, the creation, the again, the water, the light, the life. Start looking for those very, very broad topics, and then start to narrow it down.
My last question that I have for you actually looks a little bit past that and a little bit further because you are scheduled to present at NPM's convention this summer. I
Mhm.
hope that's not a surprise whenever I say
No, it's not a surprise.
that. So,
Although, in terms of missed opportunity, I just really should have done. I'm what? Yeah, yes, I'm aware of it. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
You're scheduled to present a session called Singing the Saints with J. Michael Thompson. Can you briefly give us an idea of what that will be about and what we can expect?
Well, to be 100% honest, J. Michael Thompson is really the guy on this. He wrote the compendium of uh, hymn for every saint on the United States Roman Rite calendar. I've done some of my own uh, writing of saint hymns, one for the martyr Stanley Rother, one in process now for Saint Benedict. I've done some of that as well. I think I will be there as much to talk about my work as the editor on his saints collection as much as anything else, and some considerations um, like when we were working on the text for Maria Goretti, whose story has traditionally been told, how she valiantly resisted her Roman attackers who, wanted to rob her of her purity and all of this. And some of the writing around Maria Goretti um, sounds a little bit to contemporary ears like victim blaming. That there was nothing wrong. I think it was Roman soldiers. My apologies if I don't have the hagiography correct. But so there was almost a sense of victim blaming in some of the Maria Goretti sources. And, it's like, well, and what could these poor soldiers do? She was this beautiful young woman, and, when they were, just, well, soldiers, so how to put a lens on that, saying that really what makes her holy is her her bravery in facing this evil, this evil that was there and threatening her with violence, you know, and just how her faith bolstered her to the degree that she remained brave in the face of that most horrific of evils. So to take what we inherit about the saints and then try to present it again or anew for contemporary singers. And I think in the past couple years, um, I'll just say a victim blaming text about Maria Goretti would have been poorly received, and rightly so, as we've come to learn, how many abuse victims there are in the congregation, you know. So, and that's, probably one of the more extreme examples, but um, I believe St. Catherine of Alexandria, who tended cancer patients, and I believe the legend or story of her virtuous acts of charity, talked about her drinking the water that she used to bathe the cancer patients. So it's like, how do you translate that so that it's a still very vivid kind of reality, for her witness, without necessarily getting that outright gross. Because again, how many cancer patients, how many cancer survivors do we have in our assemblies, who bring that experience in a pretty new way, as cancer treatment has advanced recently. So how do we keep her story? And I hope you don't get all kinds of messages saying, "What is he talking about? That wasn't St. Catherine." But whoever it was, the point remains that we need to keep the the witness of the saints very fervent and very vivid for today, but in a way that can be received as well as sung by a congregation today.
Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds wonderful. I'll be looking forward to that one at the convention.
I'm going to be the accompanist. So I figure, because I mean, really, J. Michael Thompson is the guy on this topic. So if I do nothing else but accompany some of the hymns, it will be a well done, good and faithful servant moment for me. So I'm happy to contribute whatever I can.
Well, either way, whether it's you or, like you said, J. Michael, it will be a great testament again to circling back where we started, which is the power of words, as we've discussed
Yes.
today. So, I mean, are there any closing thoughts that you have on the power of words?
Well, any closing thoughts I might have we would be here an extra hour. One of the, I don't know, mantras I keep before me is it's more a recollection of the opening of John's gospel. In the beginning was the word. And that being an echo of Genesis, that whether you look at the first creation account where everything came into being because God spoke, God's breath, that spirit, that wind, that Ruach Elohim that was moving on the face of the water, God spoke and creation came to be. And more directly in the second account, God didn't speak, but God gave us the very divine breath to animate us, to sing praise and to be of service to others and to spread the gospel and to carry on that life of the Holy Spirit.
Wow. Well, I think put a stamp in that. I think
Right.
That's a perfect way to end. I thank you so much for your time today, Alan.
Well,
And
completely my pleasure.
even from myself, from my perspective, I will definitely be opening my hymnal a little bit differently this weekend. So thank you.
Then my work here is done.